Leave her. We move now. Captain Hayes didn't flinch, didn't look back, didn't wait for a single voice to push back. He left a 19-year-old girl bleeding in the mud of the Bitterroot Mountains and drove away into the storm like she had never existed. She had just taken a bullet protecting his team. She had warned him about that valley. She had been right, and he left her anyway. But in the 60 seconds after those vehicles disappeared into the rain, something happened inside Maya Reynolds that nobody in that unit was prepared for. Something that was going to save every single one of them. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The last thing Maya Reynolds heard before the vehicles disappeared into the rain was the sound of tires on wet gravel. Not voices, not apologies, just the grinding crunch of military tires pulling away and then the storm swallowing everything whole. She was lying face down in the mud. Her left side burned like something alive was eating through her ribs. The bullet had gone in clean, but the way it felt inside her body was anything but clean. Every breath she tried to take came out ragged and broken, like her lungs were arguing with each other about whether to keep working. She was 19 years old. She was alone, and she was bleeding into the ground of the Bitterroot Mountains with no idea if anyone in the world even knew she was still alive. Most people in that moment would have screamed. Maya didn't scream. She pressed her fingers against the wound, gritted her teeth so hard her jaw ached, and did the one thing she had trained herself to do when everything around her turned to chaos. She listened, not for voices, not for rescue, not for the sound of those tires coming back. She listened the way she always listened, the way that nobody in her unit had ever really understood, the way that had gotten her labeled as strange, as weird as the girl who talked about sounds like other people talked about feelings. She listened for the mountain, and the mountain for the first time in her life talked back. Maya Reynolds had not grown up dreaming about war. She had grown up dreaming about music. Not the kind of music you play on a stage in front of an audience. The kind of music that lives inside everyday things, the low hum of power lines on a summer afternoon, the way a wooden floor creaks differently depending on how much weight you put on your heel versus your toe, the specific pitch that rainwater makes when it hits a corrugated metal roof compared to when it hits packed earth. Her grandmother used to say Maya came into the world with her ears already open. Most babies, her grandmother told her once, sitting on the porch of their small house in rural Idaho, cry when they're born because everything is too loud and too bright. You were different. You came out quiet, like you were already paying attention to something nobody else could hear. Maya had laughed at that story when she was young. She stopped laughing when she realized it was true. Growing up, she heard things before other people did. A car turning onto their street 2 full minutes before the headlights appeared. Her father's footsteps on the stairs at night. She could tell by the weight of each step whether he was angry or tired or happy. She could hear the difference between her mother crying in the bathroom with the faucet running to cover the sound and the faucet running because someone needed water. Sound to Maya was not just noise. It was information. It was truth. She joined the Montana Reconnaissance Division at 18, which was young enough that the recruiting officer had looked at her twice before processing her paperwork. She was not physically imposing. She was not loud or aggressive or the kind of person who filled a room with her presence. She was medium height, slender, with dark eyes that had a quality of stillness that made some people uncomfortable, like she was always watching something just past your shoulder. Reynolds, or the recruiting officer, had said, studying her file, "Says here you have no prior military family, no ROTC, no connections." He looked up. "Why are you here?" "Because I can help," she said. He had made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She was in, shown. The first 6 months were hard in ways she had not expected. Not physically. Physically, Maya was tougher than she looked. She had grown up working on a property that demanded constant labor, and her body had been shaped by years of real work rather than gym routines. She could run, she could climb, she could carry weight. What was hard was the constant grinding experience of being underestimated. It started small. In group exercises, when she offered observations about sound-based intelligence, the senior scouts would nod politely and then talk over her like she hadn't spoken. During briefings, her assessments were rarely written down. In the field, when she pointed to a direction and said, Something moved through there about 40 minutes ago. Boots on loose shale, at least 3 individuals. The response was almost always the same. Good instinct, Reynolds. Instinct. Like it was something that happened to her instead of something she did. Like listening wasn't a skill. Like processing information wasn't work. The person who first took her seriously was not who she expected. Sergeant First Class Louise Tran was 42 years old, had served 3 deployments, and had the reputation of being the kind of person who said exactly what she thought with zero decoration. When Louise told you that you were wrong, you knew it immediately, and you appreciated it because she would also tell you exactly how to be right. When Louise told you that you were good, it meant something because she didn't say it to make anyone feel better. 3 weeks into Maya's first field rotation, Louise pulled her aside after a training exercise where Maya had correctly identified the position of a simulated enemy team based entirely on the pattern of disturbed birds in the tree line above them. "How did you know?" Louise asked. Not skeptically, genuinely. "The birds," Maya said, "thrushes. They flush low when something startles them at ground level. The pattern moved northeast to southwest, which means whatever disturbed them was moving that direction. Given the speed of the flush, the disturbance was slow and deliberate, not a predator. And there were boot prints in the soft soil near the creek on that side that were about 4 hours old based on how much moisture had refilled the impressions." Louise stared at her for a long moment. "Write that down," she said finally. "Ma'am, write it down, exactly what you just told me. Every time you observe something in the field that nobody else catches, write down what you heard or saw and why it told you what it told you." Louise's expression was completely serious. "Because right now, everybody thinks you're lucky, and lucky runs out. But documented is different. Documented is a record." Maya started writing things down, and eventually the record became undeniable.
What a shame.
Captain Daniel Hayes noticed it before he admitted it. That was the thing about Hayes that Maya eventually understood. He was a man who needed evidence twice before he would commit to believing it. The first time was always just interesting. The second time was where acknowledgement lived. Hayes was 44, career military, with the kind of face that had stopped being young sometime around his second deployment and never quite found its way back. He was not cruel, he was not unfair, but he was practical in the way that sometimes rubbed against people who needed warmth to feel seen. Ran his unit with precision and with a kind of quiet authority that came not from shouting, but from being consistently right. When Hayes made a call, it was almost always the correct call. That reputation meant a lot to the people under his command. It also meant a lot to Hayes himself in ways he didn't always examine closely. The first time Maya's ability caught his attention was during a field exercise in October, about 4 months into her rotation. The unit was moving through a narrow valley, practicing suppressed movement in difficult terrain. Hayes was at the front with Sergeant Ortega. Maya was in the middle of the group. She stopped. "Hold," she said quietly. Hayes turned around. His expression was patient but not interested. "Reynolds." "Something's off," she said. "Define off." Maya was quiet for a moment, her head tilted slightly to the right, in the way that she sometimes did when she was processing sound, a habit that some members of the unit found disconcerting because it made her look like a bus hearing something in a register no human should catch. "There's an echo coming back wrong," she said. "Off the rock face at 2 o'clock. The wind is moving east, but there's a compression in the echo pattern that suggests the space on the other side of that ridge is occupied. Something is blocking the natural resonance." "That's a rock wall, Reynolds." "Yes, but there's something against the back of it that isn't rock." Hayes looked at Ortega. Ortega's expression said, "What do we do with this?" Hayes made a decision. 2 volunteers recon the ridge, carefully. The volunteers came back 11 minutes later with confirmation. The opposing training team had tucked 2 vehicles against the back face of that ridge. They were invisible from every approach. The exercise coordinators had considered their position effectively undetectable. Maya had detected them from 300 meters away. Hayes looked at her for a moment after the debrief. "Nice work, Reynolds," he said. 2 words.
What? Trust him.
But from Hayes it carried weight. The mission to the Bitterroot Mountains was supposed to last 72 hours. They were in and out in 48, but not because everything went well. The intelligence they were after was real. The enemy communication station buried inside the old mining infrastructure was real. The team confirmed the location, photographed the equipment, and documented the personnel patterns with the kind of thoroughness that would have made the operation a success under any other circumstances. Maya was the one who kept flagging the exit route. She had been flagging it since before they moved. Captain, she had approached Hayes the night before their planned extraction. The Valley Road. What about it? I don't like it. Hayes looked up from the map. His expression was the particular variety of patience that people wear when they are listening out of courtesy rather than genuine attention. Walk me through it, he said, because Hayes always let people walk through it. That was his version of fair. The valley runs north-south between two ridgelines, Maya said, which means sound funnels. Anybody positioned on either ridge can hear everything happening below without exposing themselves to line-of-sight detection. The soil composition on the valley floor, you can see it in the satellite imagery, is loose aggregate over hardpan. It carries vibration unusually far. And the weather pattern coming in from the northwest is going to drop visibility to near zero, which means we lose our air support window and our drone coverage simultaneously. We lose drone coverage on any route in this weather. Yes, but on the other routes, we don't lose it inside a channel that someone could bottle up from above with a team of 6. Hayes looked at the map. He looked at the weather data. He looked at the timeline which was pressing against them because of decisions made higher up the chain that neither he nor Maya had any power over. We don't have time for the alternate route, he said, Captain. Reynolds, his voice was not harsh, but it was closed. Noted, we move at 0400. Maya went back to her position. She thought about saying more. She didn't. Because she had learned in the months since joining this unit that there was a point at which continuing to push became the kind of thing that got you labeled as difficult instead of perceptive. And being labeled as difficult meant being listened to even less, which meant being less useful, which meant the people she was trying to protect ended up with even less of what she could give them. So she stopped talking, and she started listening instead. The ambush happened at the narrowest point of the valley. 22 minutes into their extraction, the gunfire started from the eastern ridge, 3, maybe 4 shooters with elevation and cover disciplined and patient, which meant they had been waiting for a long time and had known exactly when the team would arrive. Hayes was moving before the echo of the first shot finished bouncing. Contact east. Move, move, move. The unit exploded into trained response. People found cover. Weapons came up. Communications opened. The whole unit functioned the way a unit is supposed to function in the first terrifying seconds of unexpected contact with speed and muscle memory overriding the part of the brain that wants to freeze. Maya moved right. Not because she was told to, because in the half second after the first shot, she had already calculated where the fire was coming from based on the sound angle and the time delay between muzzle blast and impact. And she had understood something that the rest of the team had not yet processed. There was a second position, West Ridge, smaller, 2 shooters at most, but positioned to catch anyone who broke from cover to the left. West Ridge, she shouted, do not break left. Corporal Reese, who had been about to do exactly that, stopped. He looked at her. She pointed. He redirected. 3 seconds later, the West Ridge position opened up with exactly the kind of fire that would have caught anyone moving in that direction. Reese was already behind a different rock formation. But the moment of Maya's warning, the turning, the pointing, the 2 seconds she spent as an exposed target to redirect Reese, was the moment she was hit. She didn't feel it immediately. That was the strangest thing. She had always heard people describe being shot as immediately overwhelming, an instant total rearrangement of every sensory priority. For her, in the chaos of those first seconds, it registered as a hard shove to her left side. A wrongness, something that made her stumble but didn't stop her from communicating. Then the sensation caught up with her. She went down. The firefight lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time when bullets are moving through the air around you. It is also from the outside the blink of an eye. When it was over, 2 of the enemy shooters were neutralized, the rest had pulled back, and the team was regrouping in the gathering dark at the north end of the valley. The storm had arrived fully by then. Rain so heavy it felt like standing under a waterfall. Visibility measured in feet, not meters. Temperature dropping fast. Maya was propped against a boulder with her hand pressed to her side. Sergeant Tran was crouched next to her, already working on the wound, her expression tight and focused. How bad, Maya said. You've been better, Louise said. Louise. Louise's hands didn't stop moving. It's through the soft tissue. Didn't hit anything critical or you'd already know it. But you're losing blood and we are not in a position to, She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. Maya understood why. They were not in a position to do what needed to be done for her in this location, in this weather, while still being in contact range with an enemy force that knew exactly where they were. Hayes appeared above them. He crouched down. He looked at Louise. Louise looked back at him with an expression that Maya could read even through the rain and the dark, because she had spent a year learning the faces of people in her unit with the same attention she gave to everything else. Louise's expression said, I know what you're thinking, and I don't like it. Hayes's expression said, neither do I. He looked at Maya. Reynolds, his voice was controlled, but something in it was different, something quieter. How are you doing? I've been better, she said, because Louise's answer was the honest one. Hayes was quiet for 3 seconds. I'm going to be straight with you, he said, because you deserve straight. Okay. Our position is compromised. The weather is closing down everything. We have a window of approximately 20 minutes before that window closes completely, and we are all stuck here. He paused. Moving you at pace in these conditions risks reopening the wound and slowing the whole team down, Maya said. Yes, and I'm the only one who's hit. Yes, the rain hammered between them. Maya looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Maya. Survival protocol, she said. Hayes didn't answer. That's what this is, Maya said. Say it. He said it. Survival protocol. We cache supplies at your location, call in your coordinates, get to high enough ground to transmit, and get you extracted as soon as conditions allow. Which could be several hours. Several hours was a generous framing of what both of them understood could be the difference between alive and not. Louise stood up. Captain, she said, her voice had a quality that Maya had never heard from Louise before, something close to an appeal. Tron, there has to be another, there isn't. The word landed like a stone in water. Louise looked at Maya. Maya looked back at her. Do your job, Maya said quietly. All of you, do your jobs and come back. Louise's jaw tightened. Her eyes did something that she did not allow to go further than her eyes. I'll come back for you, she said, personally. I know you will. And then they were gone. The vehicles pulled out of the darkness the same way the storm had arrived suddenly, completely with no negotiation. And the sound of tires on wet gravel was the last thing Maya Reynolds heard from the people she trusted before the mountain swallowed her whole. For the first 10 minutes, she did not let herself think. Thinking she understood was the most dangerous thing she could do in those early minutes. Because thinking meant accounting for all the variables, the blood she was losing, the temperature that was dropping, the fact that her radio had taken impact damage during the firefight and was producing nothing but static, the fact that enemy forces had pulled back but not cleared the area, the fact that nobody in the world except her unit knew she was in this specific location, and her unit was currently in motion with no way to transmit. Thinking in those first 10 minutes could produce despair. And despair would kill her faster than the bullet already trying to. So instead of thinking, she listened. She pressed herself back into the deeper shadow of the boulder formation, made herself as small and as still as she could manage, and she listened. Rain on rock, rain on soil, rain on her own jacket, which had a slightly different sound than the rock behind her because fabric compresses under impact where stone deflects it. Wind through the valley lower and more channeled now that the temperature differential was increasing, creating a specific kind of pressure movement that she had learned to read during her childhood in Idaho's high country. Water running somewhere beneath her feet underground, following the natural aquifer channels that ran through this part of the mountain range. And underneath all of it, buried so deep in the ambient noise of the storm that most people would never have found. It would never have known it was there. Voices, she went still. Not the kind of still she had been. Something deeper. Something her body did involuntarily, like a circuit cutting unnecessary power to concentrate everything in one direction. Voices. Male. Multiple. Speaking with the clipped economic precision of people who were being careful about sound, discipline, but were not in complete silence mode, which meant they felt relatively secure in their position. They were not close. Maya's brain, without being instructed to, began triangulating. Sound moved differently in different conditions. In rain-heavy air with temperature dropping, with the specific valley and ridge geometry, of this location, the audio was being compressed and channeled in ways that pushed distant sound closer. The voices were coming to her through a natural acoustic corridor she had mapped in her head during their approach, a gap between two ridge formations that ran roughly east-southeast from her position. She estimated distance. Her estimate shocked her. They were not on the ridge above her. They were not in the valley behind her. They were miles away, and she could hear them, clearly, distinctly. Every word. One of them said something that made Maya's blood go colder than the rain. She had to be sure. She made herself lie completely still, completely silent, and she listened for 4 full minutes without moving, without reacting, without letting the part of her brain that was processing fear interfere with the part that was processing information. At the end of 4 minutes, she was sure. The enemy was not searching for survivors. They were not even particularly concerned with the team that had just extracted. What they were discussing in the clipped and careful language of people who believed absolutely that no one could hear them was something else entirely. Something scheduled, something large, something that, if it happened as planned, would kill hundreds of people who were currently sleeping safely inside a military installation called Fort Harrison. And it was going to happen before sunrise. Maya Reynolds, the girl they had left for dead in the freezing mud of the Bitterroot Mountains, pressed her damaged radio against her chest and began figuring out how to save them. The radio was broken in 3 places that she could feel without looking at it. Maya knew this because she had run her fingers along every surface of the device twice in the dark, the way a blind person reads a face slowly, deliberately, letting her fingertips build a picture that her eyes couldn't manage in the rain in the near-zero visibility. The outer casing had cracked on impact. The antenna coupling was loose, which explained the static. And somewhere inside the housing, something had shifted out of alignment in a way that killed the transmission function entirely while leaving the receiver partially functional. She could receive barely. She could not transmit. This was the situation at approximately 11:47 p.m., which she knew because her watch was still working, which felt like a small and almost insulting gift from the universe, given everything else that had stopped working. She pressed her hand harder against her side. The bleeding had slowed. Louise's field dressing was holding, which meant Louise had done her job the way Louise always did everything, with a kind of furious competence that left no room for failure. But slow was not stopped. And slow over hours in cold and wet, in stress, with no ability to properly elevate or treat the wound, would eventually become a serious problem. Maya gave herself a number. She did this deliberately, the way her grandmother had taught her to do when fear was trying to take over. Give the fear a container. Put the thing you're afraid of inside a number and then work around the number instead of inside it. 6 hours. 6 hours before the blood loss and the cold and the exposure began compounding each other in ways that crossed into genuinely dangerous territory. 6 hours was a working estimate, probably conservative, which meant it was the right number to use because conservative estimates kept you honest about urgency without tipping you into panic. She had 6 hours. The attack on Fort Harrison was happening before sunrise. Sunrise at this latitude at this time of year was approximately 6:14 a.m. It was 11:47 p.m. She had roughly 6.5 hours to stop an attack that she couldn't warn anyone about because her radio was broken. Her unit was in motion and the enemy forces were miles away, having a conversation that no human being should have been able to hear from her position. Maya Reynolds lay in the mud with a bullet wound in her side and a broken radio in her hands and listened to the mountain tell her things that were going to get people killed if she didn't figure out what to do. She started with what she knew. The voices she had been hearing for the past 20 minutes had given her several concrete details that she was already organizing in the part of her mind that functioned like a filing system. Quiet, methodical, no wasted space. She had learned to trust that system completely, the same way she trusted her ears, because the two worked together in a way she had never been able to fully explain to anyone who asked. There was a primary assault team, based on the number of distinct voices in the patterns of a conversation she was tracking. She estimated between 30 and 40 personnel. They were mobile, which she knew because the acoustic quality of their voices shifted slightly as they spoke, the subtle compression and expansion that happened when sound sources moved in relation to a fixed listener. They were moving northeast, toward Fort Harrison. There was a secondary element she couldn't fully hear yet, something at the edge of her range, which on a clear night with no storm interference would have been nothing but tonight with the valley geometry, working like a natural amplifier, and the temperature inversion pushing sound down, rather than letting it scatter upward. She was catching fragments. Enough fragments to understand the secondary element was material, equipment, something being transported that required multiple vehicles and careful handling. This was not a raid, this was a coordinated strike, and she had one broken radio of field dressing that was doing its best and the most extraordinary pair of ears that the Montana Reconnaissance Division had ever seen fit to underestimate. She started working on the radio. At 12:08 a.m., her fingers found the problem inside the housing. The internal connector that linked the transmission module to the power source had been knocked partially free. In normal circumstances, this was a 30-second fixed press, the connector back into its seat, hear the click transmit. But the impact that had dislodged the connector had also bent the guide track that held it in position, which meant pressing it back in just caused it to slip sideways instead of seating properly. She needed something to brace the connector from the wrong side. She thought for approximately 4 seconds about what she had available. Then she took off her watch. The watch had a metal bracelet with a specific link width that she had measured with her thumb and index finger enough times over the years to know precisely her grandmother had given her the watch when she was 16, and the bracelet had needed adjustment twice, and she had paid attention both times because that was the kind of person she was. She worked a single link free from the bracelet. She did not have light. She did not have tools. She had cold fingers and a wound that made her breath come short whenever she moved her left arm too far. She worked the link into the housing of the radio and positioned it against the bent guide track and pressed the connector home. She heard a sound that was almost too small to count as a click. But it was a click. She pressed the transmit button, static. She adjusted the antenna coupling by feel rotating it a quarter turn counterclockwise. More static. She rotated it back a tenth of a turn. The static changed pitch. She pressed transmit again. Any station, any station. This is Recon 6 Delta. Do you copy? Any station, this is Recon 6 Delta with urgent traffic. Do you copy? The static ate her words. She waited 15 seconds and tried again, and again, and again. At 12:31 a.m., which was 44 minutes after she had started working on the radio, a voice came back through the receiver, faint, broken into pieces by the storm, in the distance, in the geography between her position and wherever the signal was originating. But a voice. 6 Delta, this is, say again, breaking up. 6 Delta, confirm. Maya pressed the transmit button so hard her thumb ached. This is Recon 6 Delta Corporal Reynolds grid reference. Bravo November 7-4 requesting urgent relay to Major Mitchell at Operations Command. I have time-sensitive intelligence regarding a planned enemy strike on Fort Harrison. Over. The voice on the other end said something she couldn't fully parse. She repeated herself. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th transmission, the voice came back cleaner. 6 Delta, we have your general area. Say again your intelligence report. Over. And Maya Reynolds, lying in the mud of the Bitterroot Mountains with a broken radio held together by a watch band link and her own determination, started talking. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. She described the voices. She described the direction of movement. She described the number of personnel. She described the secondary element and what it suggested about the nature of the attack. She described the time. She described the route the primary assault team was taking, which she had been able to partially reconstruct from the acoustic movement and pattern of their voices over the past 30 minutes. She described everything. And then the voice on the other end said something that hit her harder than the bullet had. 6 Delta, be advised. Command is reviewing your report. Be advised that, given the circumstances of your current status, they are requesting confirmation of your mental acuity. Over. Maya closed her eyes. She breathed through her nose. She counted to 3. Say again that last over. 6 Delta Command wants to confirm, are you experiencing any symptoms consistent with blood loss affecting cognition? Over. For a moment, the only sound was rain and static. Then Maya said very carefully, very clearly, with every ounce of professional control she possessed. Tell Command that I am experiencing symptoms consistent with a bullet wound, which I received while protecting members of this unit during a planned ambush, and that my cognition is functioning at 100%. Tell them the information I have provided is accurate. Tell them I understand that it sounds impossible. And tell them that I have never been wrong. Over. There was a long pause. Standing by 6 Delta, she stood by, or rather she lay in the mud and bled slowly and listened to the mountain and waited for someone to decide whether the girl they had left behind was worth believing. While she waited, she kept listening, because the voices were still out there, and they had started talking about something new. At 12:49 a.m., the conversation she was tracking changed in a way that raised every instinct she possessed. A new voice had entered the communication, lower than the others, more deliberate, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who did not need to raise it to be obeyed. And this voice was not talking about the assault timeline or the equipment or the personnel deployment. This voice was talking about the reconnaissance team, her team, not just the ambush, not just the mission. The voice was talking about specific details of the unit's composition, their communication protocols, their operational patterns. Details that were not available in any external intelligence file. Details that required an internal source. Maya's stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She pressed transmit. Any station, this is 6 Delta. Urgent update to my previous report. Requesting immediate relay to Major Mitchell, eyes only. I have information suggesting internal compromise. Over. The pause that followed was longer than the previous ones. When the voice came back, it was different, more alert. 6 Delta, I am patching you through to Major Mitchell directly. Stand by. And for the first time since the vehicles had disappeared into the rain, Maya Reynolds allowed herself to feel something that was not quite hope, because hope was premature, but was at least in the general neighborhood. She was being taken seriously. It had taken 49 minutes of lying in the cold with a bullet wound and a radio she had fixed with a piece of her watch band. But she was being taken seriously. The transfer took 3 minutes. The voice that came on the line after those 3 minutes was one Maya recognized immediately, even filtered through storm interference and a partially damaged receiver. Major Sarah Mitchell had a particular quality to her speech, a kind of compressed economy, like every word had been approved by committee before she said it, that was instantly identifiable once you had heard it. Reynolds, Major Mitchell. I'm looking at your report right now. Talk to me about the acoustic range you're claiming. Maya had expected this. Not the skepticism, she was past being surprised by skepticism, but the direct engagement. Mitchell was not the kind of officer who wasted time with disbelief as a posture. If she was asking about the acoustic range, it was because she was trying to build a framework for evaluation, not because she was looking for a reason to dismiss it. The valley geometry, Maya said, is acting as a compression channel. There's a temperature inversion from the storm system, which is pushing sound down rather than allowing it to dissipate upward. Combined with the ridge configuration east-southeast of my position, I'm receiving audio from approximately. She stopped, not because she lost her train of thought, because she heard something new, something close, much closer than miles, maybe 300 meters. Movement in the rocks above her position. Not the random movement of rain and wind on loose stone. Deliberate movement, controlled movement. 2 sets of footfalls moving carefully, moving with the specific rhythm of people who were looking for something. She pressed the radio against her body and lowered her voice to just above a breath. Major, I need to go quiet. There are personnel in my immediate area. Over. Mitchell's response was immediate and low-key, which told Maya everything about the quality of the woman on the other end. No alarm, no questions, just understood. Go quiet. We're working this end. Stay on the line. Over. Maya stopped transmitting. She made herself as small as she could. She listened. The 2 sets of footfalls were moving in a pattern she recognized from field training. A modified sweep, one person moving forward while the other held position, then rotating. They were searching systematically. They were not panicking. They were disciplined. They had been sent for her specifically. This was not a casual patrol through the area after a firefight. The pattern of movement, the deliberateness of it, the way they were working toward her position from the high ground rather than across the valley floor. This was a search. Someone had calculated approximately where the wounded scout would be and sent 2 people to confirm she was no longer a problem. Maya did not move. She regulated her breathing until each exhale was no louder than the rain. She tracked their position by sound building a real-time map in her head that updated every 3 to 4 seconds as new acoustic information came in. Two men, military-grade boots based on the way each step landed full sole contact rather than heel-to-toe civilian walking pattern. Armed almost certainly. Moving in practiced silence, which meant trained, which meant she could not underestimate the possibility that they were as good in the dark as she was. The difference was that she was not moving. Moving made noise. Standing still in the dark and the rain was something that Maya Reynolds was extraordinarily good at because she had spent her entire life practicing it on the porch of her grandmother's house in the hills of Idaho, in the training fields of the Montana Reconnaissance Division. And she had learned long ago that the hardest thing about standing still was not the physical part, it was the mental part. It was the place in your brain that understood you were in danger and wanted to run, and the other place in your brain that understood running would make everything worse, and the narrow corridor between those two places where rational thought had to operate under conditions it was never designed for. She stayed in that corridor. She did not move. At 1:17 a.m., one of the searchers spoke. She was close enough now to hear the words without her ability doing anything exceptional at all. Nothing over here. Storm's too heavy. If she took a hit like they said, she's not getting far. A pause, then the second voice slightly further. Command wants confirmation. I'm telling you what I see. Rain rocks, nothing moving. Girl's either buried under a foot of mud somewhere or she already bled out. We need confirmation. Then you get confirmation. I'm not spending another hour in this. Move to the secondary grid. We sweep once more and then we call it. The footfalls shifted. They were moving away, east of her position toward the secondary grid, which was she noted approximately 40 meters from where she actually was. Someone's information about her location had been close, but not exact. Close enough to send the searchers, not close enough to find her. She waited 4 minutes after the sounds of their movement faded completely before she raised the radio again. Her hands were not shaking. She was proud of that. Major Mitchell, this is 6 Delta. Two-person search team just cleared my immediate vicinity. I believe I was the target. They're moving east. This confirms what I told you about internal compromise. The searchers knew my approximate location, which means they had access to information from my unit's last known position report. Over. The pause before Mitchell's response was the specific kind of pause that Maya had learned to read over a year of fieldwork. Not the pause of someone thinking about whether to believe her, but the pause of someone recalculating an entire operational picture based on new information that changed the shape of it. Reynolds, Mitchell said finally, I need you to understand something. Yes, ma'am. What you're describing, both the acoustic intelligence and the compromise indicator. If it's accurate, this changes the scope of what we're dealing with significantly. I understand. I have people working right now to verify the Fort Harrison element of your report through independent channels. That process takes time we may not have, which means I'm going to need to make a judgment call before that verification is complete. Another pause. I need to know how confident you are, not how confident you want to be, how confident you actually are. Maya thought about the voices. She thought about every detail she had cataloged. The number of personnel, the route, the timing, the secondary element that told her this was coordinated rather than opportunistic. The new voice, the one that had been talking about her unit's internal details, with a familiarity that turned her stomach. She thought about every time she had been right. She thought about the training exercise where she had located the hidden vehicles, the convoy she had tracked through fog, the route she had flagged the night before the ambush that Hayes hadn't had time to change. She thought about the word Louise always used when people asked about Maya's ability. Documented. 100%, Maya said, a longer pause. Then stay on this frequency. Do not go quiet unless you have hostiles within 50 meters. I'm going to need continuous updates on that assault team's movement. Can you maintain acoustic contact from your current position? Yes. Can you do it for the next 4 to 5 hours? Maya looked at the field dressing on her side. She looked at the rain coming down. She looked at her watch, the watch band now 1 link shorter long. The missing piece holding her connection to the outside world, together inside a broken piece of equipment. Yes, she said. It was not bravado, it was a decision. There is a meaningful difference, and Maya Reynolds understood that difference with the clarity of someone who had been making decisions her whole life that other people didn't believe she was capable of making. Bravado is when you say yes because the word sounds right. Decision is when you say yes because you have looked at every alternative and understood that this one is the one that gets people home alive. She settled herself more firmly against the rock. She adjusted the dressing, she regulated her breathing, and she listened. At 1:44 a.m., she had a new position estimate on the primary assault team. She transmitted it. At 2:03 a.m., she picked up a fragment of communication from the secondary element that refined her understanding of what they were transporting. She transmitted that too. At 2:19 a.m., Mitchell came back on the line with news. Reynolds, I have partial verification on your assault team positioning from a forward observation asset we repositioned 20 minutes ago. You're within acceptable margin of error on their location. Maya processed this. What's acceptable margin? You put them within 180 meters of confirmed position. I can do better than that with cleaner conditions. I believe you. And then Mitchell said something that Maya had to ask her to repeat because she wasn't sure she had heard it correctly through the interference. I said Fort Harrison is changing defensive posture as of right now. Full alert. We're not waiting for full verification. Maya closed her eyes, opened them. Copy that, she said. At 2:31 a.m., which was approximately 2 hours and 44 minutes after she had been left in the mountains, Maya Reynolds made a sound that she immediately controlled and suppressed a single short exhale through her nose that was the closest thing to relief she was going to allow herself right now. Because there was still work to do. The assault team was still moving. The internal compromise she had identified was still unresolved. She was still bleeding slowly but consistently into a field dressing in the Bitterroot Mountains. And the voice, the low, deliberate one that had been discussing her unit's details with knowledge, no outsider should have had gone quiet in the last 30 minutes. She didn't like that. Quiet voices were not absent voices. They were voices that had changed their approach, voices that were being more careful. And in her experience, voices that became more careful were the ones that had realized something had changed in the operational picture. Someone somewhere had realized that the wounded girl in the mountains might not be as finished as they had assumed. She pressed transmit. Major Mitchell, regarding the internal compromise, I need you to understand something about the specific details that second team had access to. The information they were working from was not from public operational records. It came from someone who knew our unit's standard holding position protocol after emergency extraction. That's a small group of people. Noted. I can give you the exact conversation I overheard. Names, grid references, timing language, everything they said. I have it verbatim. Another pause. Reynolds, you held all of that in memory. Yes. From a conversation you heard at Miles, I know how it sounds. I wasn't going to say that. Everybody says that eventually. There was a sound on Mitchell's end of the line that Maya, in different circumstances, might have identified as something very close to a laugh, suppressed out of professionalism. Give me the information, Reynolds. And Maya talked for another 8 minutes. She gave names she had caught, in fragments names that had been spoken with the casual familiarity of people who believed absolutely that no one could hear them. She gave phrases that the new voice had used, precise and unchanged from how she had first heard them. She gave the grid reference that had been mentioned in the context of where the search team was being directed. The grid reference that was close to, but not exactly her location, which told her something important about how old the information source was. When she finished, Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Reynolds, she said finally, I'm going to need you to understand that what you just gave me is going to initiate an investigation that goes beyond this operation significantly. I understand. The names you mentioned, I know. One of them. I know, Maya said again, and she kept her voice completely steady because she had known since 12:49 a.m., since the moment she had heard the new voice, and started cataloging what it was saying, and she had spent the last hour and 42 minutes sitting with the knowledge, and she was not going to fall apart now. I recognize the phrasing, the operational language. It's someone with current access clearance. Mitchell said nothing for 4 seconds. You're certain. I'm certain about what I heard. You're the one who has to determine what it means. Understood. At 3:07 a.m., 3 hours and 20 minutes after the vehicles had pulled away, Mitchell's voice came back on the line with a quality that Maya had not heard from her before. Something crisper, something that had the particular texture of a person who had just watched a piece of intelligence. They were skeptical about prove itself out. Reynolds, I have full verification from 2 independent assets on the assault team position and wrote, "You were right. You were exactly right." Maya said nothing. Fort Harrison is fully prepared. We have defensive positions the assault team has no idea exist. The secondary element, you were right about that too. What they're transporting is significant. Our people are already working on interdiction. Still Maya said nothing. Are you still with me? I'm here, she said. I need you to stay warm, stay conscious. We have an extraction asset that can reach your position in approximately 90 minutes once the weather window opens, which we're estimating around 4:30 a.m. A pause. Can you hold 90 minutes past weather window? Maya checked the dressing. She thought about the 6-hour number she had given herself at the beginning of this night. Yes, she said. Reynolds. Ma'am, you know that nobody is going to believe how you did this. Maya looked up at the rain. She thought about every time she had been called lucky, every time someone had said instinct like it was a word for something random instead of something real. Every time a report she had filed had been read politely and then set aside because the person reading it couldn't reconcile what she was describing with what they believed was possible. Some people are going to believe it, she said, the ones who were paying attention. They always were, Mitchell said, and this time she didn't suppress whatever was in her voice. We just weren't doing a good enough job of listening to you. Maya did not have a response for that, or rather she had one, but she kept it inside stored in the same filing system where she kept everything that mattered quiet, methodical, safe. She pressed her hand against her side. She checked her watch. 3:09 a.m. Sunrise in approximately 3 hours and 5 minutes. The storm was still coming down. The mountain was still talking. She was still listening. And somewhere in the darkness northeast of her position, hundreds of sleeping soldiers were about to find out whether a 19-year-old girl with a broken radio and a piece of her watch band could hold the line long enough for it to matter. She already knew the answer. She had known it since the moment she pressed the connector home and heard that first almost not there click. She had always known it. The question was never whether she could do what needed to be done. The question, the one she had been answering her whole life in training exercises and field rotations and mission briefings, where people nodded politely and talked over her, was whether anyone would be paying attention when she did it. Tonight, finally, someone was. And Maya Reynolds settled herself against the rock, regulated her breathing, and kept her ears open to the mountain and listened and listened and listened until the storm began slowly, grudgingly, like something enormous, reconsidering a decision to soften at its edges. The storm softened at 4:11 a.m. Not by much, not enough to call it clearing, but the kind of softening that Maya had learned to recognize over years of working in mountain terrain, a reduction in the pressure of the rain, a slight shift in wind direction, a change in the quality of the air that told you the worst of it had moved through, and what remained was the trailing edge rather than the heart. She had been awake for 19 hours. She had been lying in the mud wounded for 4 hours and 24 minutes. And she had not stopped transmitting useful intelligence for a single moment of those 4 hours and 24 minutes that the radio would cooperate with her. At 3:44 a.m., she had given Mitchell an updated position on the primary assault team that was precise enough to make the analyst on the other end of the relay ask her to repeat the coordinates twice, not because he doubted them, because the precision was beyond what any asset in the field should have been capable of producing under these conditions, and he needed the repetition to confirm he had written them down correctly. At 3:52 a.m., she had detected a change in the assault team's movement pattern. They had slowed. The acoustic signature of their approach had shifted in a way that she had learned through careful attention over the past hours to read like a language. Slower movement in a disciplined formation meant one of two things: they were approaching their final staging point, or they had detected something unexpected. She transmitted both possibilities. Mitchell came back within 90 seconds. Reynolds, our forward asset, confirms they have gone to ground approximately 800 meters from the Fort Harrison perimeter. They're in final staging. Then you have maybe 40 minutes before they move. We know Fort Harrison is ready. A pause. Are you ready for what an extraction window opens at 4:30? Asset is already in the air. ETA to your position, weather dependent, 22 to 30 minutes from window open. Maya processed this. 22 to 30 minutes from 4:30 meant she would have company between 4:52 and 5:00 a.m. She looked at her watch. 4:13 a.m. 37 minutes. Her side was a steady, low-burning presence that had moved past the acute stage of pain and settled into something more persistent and more exhausting. The kind of pain that didn't spike so much as grind, wearing down your reserves, the way water wears down stone slowly and without any dramatic announcement. She was cold in a way that had moved into her bones. But she was thinking clearly. She knew she was thinking clearly because she was still processing sound at full capacity, and the two were connected for her in a way that she had never been able to fully articulate, but had never doubted. When her cognition degraded, her hearing narrowed. When her hearing was wood-eyed and clean, and pulling in everything around her, her thinking was intact. Her hearing was wide, very wide. And at 4:17 a.m., it found something that made her stomach drop through the ground. The new voice, the low, deliberate one that had gone quiet around 2:30 a.m., the one she had told Mitchell about, the one speaking with insider knowledge about her unit, had reappeared. Not miles away, not in the acoustic channel through the ridge formation east-southeast of her position. Closer, much closer than that, 3/4 of a mile, maybe less. And it was not discussing the assault on Fort Harrison. It was discussing her. 6 Delta is still transmitting, the voice said. Clear enough now that she could hear the specific quality of it, the control, the deliberateness, the absence of panic or surprise. This was a person who had received bad news before and had learned not to let it show on his face or in his voice. Asset is confirmed, still operational. A response she couldn't fully make out. Another voice further away. Then the first voice again. The window is closing. We cannot allow her to be extracted with that information. Maya's hand tightened on the radio. She pressed transmit. Major Mitchell, priority update. The individual I identified in my earlier report, the voice discussing internal unit details, is now within approximately 3/4 of a mile of my position and is aware that I am still transmitting. He has referenced preventing my extraction. Over. The response came back faster than any previous response had. Copy 6 Delta. I am diverting the extraction asset to your position ahead of schedule. ETA from current heading 14 minutes. Can you mark your position with anything visible from the air? Negative on visible weather is still too low. But I have my signal mirror, and if the aircraft drops below 300 feet on approach, I can create a reflection signature. Asset pilot is being briefed now. 14 minutes, Reynolds. Stay exactly where you are. Understood. She stayed where she was and she listened. The voice was moving. Not fast, careful. The footfall pattern she could now pick up, one set moving alone, with the specific gait of someone navigating difficult terrain with purpose, but not desperation, was angling in a direction that would bring it across the high ground north of her position. Not directly toward her, but close enough as the angle of approach concerned her. She recalculated. If she was wrong about his trajectory by 10 degrees, he would pass wide. If she was right, he would crest the high ground, approximately 180 meters from where she was lying, in the next 8 to 10 minutes. And from 180 meters on high ground, with a clear enough sightline, even in rain, and even in the pre-dawn dark, he would not need exceptional vision to identify a figure against the rock formation she was sheltering against. She had two options. She could move. Moving meant noise, and it meant reopening the wound, and it meant relocating to a position she had not scouted in the dark, while injured with reduced mobility. Or she could stay. Staying meant trusting her position assessment, trusting her trajectory calculation, trusting that she had correctly read 3/4 of a mile of acoustic data, and that the man moving toward the high ground was going to pass wide by the margin she thought he was. She thought about all the times she had trusted her ears. She stayed. At 4:24 a.m., the footfalls crested the high ground. She tracked them without breathing. 100 meters, 90, 80. She heard him stop. She heard him turn. She heard the specific sound of a person scanning the small, involuntary shifts in weight that happen when someone is turning their head and body together to look across a wide area. She did not move. She did not breathe. She was a part of the rock. 45 seconds. I was standing on the high ground, 60 meters from her position, closer than her calculation had suggested. which meant she had been wrong by approximately 20 degrees on the trajectory, which was within acceptable margin, but had still put him in a location that required her to be completely motionless. She was completely motionless, and then he moved again, south, away from her position. His footfalls receded with a particular rhythm of someone who had not found what they were looking for and was relocating to try a different angle. Maya exhaled, pressed transmit. He was on the high ground 60 meters north of my position. He's moving south now. He hasn't located me. Over. Mitchell, 12 minutes Reynolds. Asset is descending. Copy. Tell the pilot the rock formation runs east-west. I'm at the western end. Transmitted. At 4:29 a.m., the assault on Fort Harrison began. She heard it before any radio report confirmed it. Not the voices this time, the actual physical event compressed through miles of mountain terrain into something that arrived at her position as a low-resonant series of impacts, muffled by distance and the remaining weather, but distinct. She had heard enough ordnance detonations in training to recognize the pattern. The enemy had moved, and Fort Harrison had answered. The sounds of the engagement came to her in waves organized and tense, with the specific quality of a defensive engagement where the defending force has preparation and surprise on its side. She could not track individual elements the way she could track voices, but she could hear the shape of it. The attack was meeting resistance it had not anticipated. The disciplined, coordinated approach was encountering a coordinated response. The ambush had been ambushed. Mitchell's voice came on the line at 4:33 a.m. with a controlled urgency that Maya recognized as the operational version of awe. Reynolds, it's working. They walked right into the prepared positions. The secondary element, our interdiction team, has the vehicles stopped on the eastern approach road. It's working. Good, Maya said. Her voice was quieter than she intended. Mitchell caught it. Reynolds, talk to me. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. 7 minutes to extraction. A pause. 7 minutes, but talk to me. Maya pressed her hand harder against her side. The dressing was saturated. Not dangerously, she had managed the situation carefully enough that it hadn't reached critical, but the saturation told her she was approaching the outer limit of the 6-hour window she had calculated for herself. She had been awake for 19 hours and 46 minutes. She had been maintaining acoustic tracking of multiple subjects across miles of mountain terrain for over 4 hours, while managing a bullet wound with one hand and a broken radio with the other. I'm tired, she said. You're allowed to be tired. Not yet. Not for 7 more minutes. Mitchell made that sound again, the one from earlier, the one that was very close to a laugh. Reynolds, I want you to know something. You can tell me when I'm on the aircraft. I'll tell you now and again when you're on the aircraft. Mitchell's voice changed, lost some of its operational crispness, became something more direct, more personal in the way that people sometimes allowed themselves to be direct when the urgency of a situation stripped away the professional buffer. What you did tonight is not something I have words for yet. I am going to spend the next several days finding the right words, but I want you to know that I heard you. From the first transmission, I heard you. Maya did not respond immediately. She looked at the sky above her, still dark, still cloud-heavy, but with a quality that was beginning to change at the very eastern edge, a suggestion of something lighter trying to find its way through. Most people don't, she said finally. I know. That's going to change. Is it? Reynolds, you just prevented a mass casualty event at a major installation using equipment that should not have been operational from a position that should have been unrecoverable while maintaining enough cognitive precision to also identify an internal security compromise that our entire intelligence apparatus missed. A pause. Things are going to change. At 4:39 a.m., she heard the aircraft. The specific frequency of the rotors was distinct even through the remaining weather. She had always been able to identify helicopter types by their acoustic signature, a skill that had produced exactly the kind of politely skeptical looks she had come to expect from the people around her. She pulled her signal mirror from the chest pocket of her jacket. The mirror had a small hole in the center for sighting. She positioned it against her palm, angled toward the sound of the approaching aircraft. The cloud base was lower than she wanted. She waited. At 4:41 a.m., the aircraft dropped below the cloud base approximately 400 meters northeast of her position. She caught the rotor with the mirror. The reflection signal wasn't the clean directed flash of a textbook signal mirror technique. The light conditions were wrong for that, but the aircraft's own navigation lighting gave her enough working brightness to create a broken, intermittent reflection that was very different from the random glint of rain on rock. The aircraft banked left, toward her. She pressed transmit. I have visual on the asset. They're coming in from the northeast. They have you on the mirror. Wave your left arm when they're within 100 meters. At 70 meters, she waved. The aircraft came down. And 60 seconds later, for the first time in 4 hours and 51 minutes, Maya Reynolds was not alone. The crew chief was a young man whose name she didn't catch over the sound of the rotors, but whose hands as he helped her aboard were absolutely steady and absolutely certain. He looked at her, looked at her face, and made a quick professional assessment. You're good, he said, meaning you're going to make it, not meaning this is fine, it's nothing. I know, she said. He helped her into the aircraft. She did not let go of the radio. He noticed this. We have comms on board, he said. Better than whatever. He looked at the damaged device in her hand. That is. I know. She kept holding it. He did not press the point. The aircraft lifted, and as it rose above the rock formation where she had spent the last 5 hours, Maya looked down at the ground. She was leaving the mud, the rocks, the darkness, and she felt something that she was not able to name with any precision. It was not triumph. It was not relief exactly. It was something that lived in the same general territory as those things, but was quieter, more internal. The feeling of a person who has gone as far as they needed to go and has come back changed by the distance. She had gone in as the girl they left behind. She was leaving as something she did not have a name for yet. Mitchell came on through the aircraft's onboard comm at 4:47 a.m. Reynolds, you're in the air. I'm in the air. Fort Harrison is holding. The assault has broken. Enemy forces fragmenting, pursuing elements on 3 sides. The secondary element is in custody. A brief pause. It's over. The internal compromise, Maya said. You're moving on that. Already moving? The names you gave me, we've already initiated. Good. Reynolds. Mitchell's voice dropped to something quieter, something that felt like it was meant for Maya and not for the operational record. Captain Hayes is at the field hospital. He requested to be notified when you were extracted. Maya said nothing for a moment. He's at the hospital. He came back the moment we had weather break enough to move. He's been there for 2 hours. Maya looked out the window of the aircraft at the dark mountains beneath her, the Bitterroot range that had swallowed her whole and then reluctantly given her back. Tell him I'm coming in, she said. I will. She leaned back against the aircraft wall. The crew chief was monitoring her condition with the focused attention of someone doing their job well. He had applied a fresh field dressing over Louise's original one, had checked her pulse, her color, her responsiveness, all without making her feel like a patient rather than a person, which she appreciated more than she could easily express. At 4:53 a.m. something happened that she was not expecting. The radio in her hand, the broken repaired, held together by a watch band link battered mud-covered device that had been the difference between everything and nothing tonight, made a sound, not static, a voice, not Mitchell's, a voice she recognized from the mountain, the low, deliberate voice, coming through the receiver clearly enough that the crew chief looked up from what he was doing because of the quality of her expression had changed in a way that apparently required his attention. 6 Delta, the voice said. No static prefix, no protocol. Direct, which told her he had the frequency specifically. You did well, better than we expected. That doesn't happen often. Maya looked at the radio in her hand. She looked at the crew chief. She pressed transmit. Is this a surrender contact? A brief silence. It's an acknowledgement, the voice said. Soldier to soldier, what you did tonight was extraordinary. Most people in your position would have died in the first hour. Most people didn't have a reason to stay alive. And you did. 312 soldiers sleeping at Fort Harrison, she said. That's a reason. Another silence. The names you gave Mitchell, the voice said, and now there was something different in it. Not the controlled professionalism that had characterized it all night, but something underneath that, something human and tired. And maybe she thought afraid. You understood what that would mean. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. Why? Maya thought about this question, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer deserved to be said correctly. Because the truth doesn't become less true, because it's inconvenient, she said. And because the people who depended on this unit deserved to know who was selling them. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she thought the transmission had dropped. Then, "They're coming for me now." "I know," she said. "I can hear them." Another silence. And then with a quality that she would spend a long time afterward trying to categorize, "Of course you can." The transmission ended. The crew chief was looking at her with an expression that contained several questions. He was too professional to ask. "I'll need to report that contact," Maya said. "Full transcript, both sides." "Yes, ma'am," but he said, which was the first time anyone in the Montana Reconnaissance Division's operational structure had ever addressed her as ma'am. And it landed differently than she expected, not like a formality, but like a recognition. At 5:19 a.m., the aircraft set down at the field hospital. The eastern sky was beginning its first serious gesture toward light. Not sunrise yet, but the announcement of it, the way a room changes when someone in another part of the house turns on a light. The doors open. Standing at the edge of the landing pad in the rain, that was now genuinely softening rather than just easing, was Captain Daniel Hayes. He looked like a man who had made a decision he could not undo and had been standing in the rain thinking about it for 2 hours. He looked like a man who had come because there was no other option that he could live with. He looked older than she remembered, and she had last seen him 12 hours ago. The crew chief helped her down from the aircraft. She stood on her own feet. Hayes walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at her, at the mud, at the dressing, at the radio still in her hand, at the face of a 19-year-old who had spent the night being tested by something most people would not survive, and his jaw moved before his voice came. "Reynolds," he said, "Captain." A long pause. He stopped. He tried again. "I made the call that I was trained to make," he said, and she could hear with perfect clarity that he was not saying this to justify himself. He was saying it because he needed to put it in the air between them, needed to name what he had done before he could say anything else. "And I have been standing in that rain for 2 hours understanding that the call I was trained to make is something I'm going to carry." "You made the right call by protocol," Maya said. "That's not..." "Captain, you made the right call by protocol. The protocol exists for a reason. Carrying an injured scout through that terrain in those conditions would have compromised the entire team." "I know that." "Then why are you standing in the rain?" Hayes looked at her for a moment. "Because knowing something is right and feeling it are two completely different things," he said. "And because you were 19 years old and I drove away and left you bleeding in the mountain and you saved 312 people and identified a security compromise that had been running for God knows how long, and I need you to know that I know what you did." Maya studied his face. She was very good at reading faces in the same way she was very good at reading sounds with full attention, without projection, taking in what was actually there instead of what she expected to find. What she found in Hayes's face was not guilt performing itself for her benefit. It was something genuine and complicated and heavy. She made a decision. "Sir," she said, "I need to get inside and let someone look at this wound, and then I need to sit down with Major Mitchell and debrief everything from tonight." "Of course. But when that's done," she paused, "I'd like to debrief with you too, if you're available." He looked at her. "You're not..." "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm really not. I'm going to need some time before I understand exactly what I am." "But angry, isn't it?" She looked past him at the eastern sky. "You need to hear what I heard last night. You need to understand what's been running inside this unit. And I think that conversation matters more right now than anything either of us feels." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "You're 19 years old," he said, and it was not a criticism or an observation. It was something closer to disbelief and not the kind aimed at her ability. The kind aimed at himself for not having understood sooner what kind of person was standing in front of him. "I'll be 20 in March," she said, and she walked past him into the field hospital. The medical team was waiting. They took the radio out of her hand the first time she had released it in 4 hours and 53 minutes, and they guided her to a table and started doing what medical teams do with efficiency and focus, and the particular kind of care that people who have seen a lot of bad things bring to the ones who made it back. The doctor who examined her wound said something to the nurse that Maya caught clearly even through the organized noise of the hospital. He said she should not have been able to maintain function with this level of blood loss for this length of time. And the nurse, without looking up, said, "Sir, from what I heard, that's kind of her whole thing." Maya closed her eyes. She let the medical team do their work. She let herself, for the first time since 11:47 p.m., stop listening for enemies. She could still hear everything. She would always be able to hear everything. The doctor's conversation, the nurse's footsteps, the rain outside still falling, but thinner now, quieter, like something that had spent most of its energy and was running down. The distant sound of the field hospital's generator cycling through its load rhythm. Voices in the corridor, operational voices. People managing the aftermath of a night that had not gone the way anyone planned, except the one person nobody had planned on. She let herself hear all of it without processing it for threat. She let it just be sound. She thought about the radio sitting somewhere near her now, its broken housing and its bent guide track in the single watch band link that had held the whole transmission chain together for nearly 5 hours. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about what she would say when she called home. She thought about Louise Tran somewhere in the field with Hayes's unit and whether Louise had heard yet that she was out. At 5:41 a.m., her phone waterlogged but operational buzzed. A text message from an unsaved number she recognized immediately as Louise's field phone. It said, "Told you I'd come back for you, you came back first." Typical. Maya looked at the message for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on her chest and closed her eyes and listened to the field hospital around her and to the rain outside and to the slow, steady sound of her own heartbeat doing exactly what it was supposed to do. At 5:58 a.m., 6 hours and 11 minutes after the vehicles had disappeared into the storm, the sun made its first serious appearance over the eastern edge of the Bitterroot Mountains. Maya Reynolds did not see it. She was already asleep, but she heard it. In the way that the birds changed their calls when light came, in the way the wind shifted when the temperature differential between the warming sky and the cold earth started to resolve, in the way the mountain exhaled something that was not quite sound, but that she had always been able to feel in her ears like a pressure change. She heard the morning come, and it sounded like something she had earned. She slept for 11 hours. When Maya opened her eyes, the light coming through the hospital window had the flat, pale quality of late afternoon, and for approximately 4 seconds she did not know where she was. Then the sounds resolved themselves, the generator, the corridor, voices, the particular mechanical rhythm of a field hospital, doing its constant work, and she remembered everything in the order it had happened, which was the way her memory always worked, like a recording playing back from the beginning rather than assembling itself in pieces. She remembered the vehicles pulling away. She remembered the radio. She remembered the voice. She sat up carefully. Her side pulled with a deep warning ache that told her the wound was real, and the night had been real, and none of it was the kind of thing you slept off and went back to normal. A nurse appeared at the curtain almost immediately. Maya had heard her coming from 12 feet away before she arrived and gave her the kind of look that medical professionals give patients who sit up before they have been told they can. "You're awake," the nurse said. "I need to speak with Major Mitchell. You need to drink something and let me check your dressing first." "Both," Maya said. "I can do both." The nurse looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite exasperation and not quite admiration, but occupied the territory between the two. Then she reached for the monitoring equipment and started her check without further argument. "Mitchell's been in the building for 3 hours, the nurse said while she worked. "She said to tell her the moment you were up." "Then please tell her now." "After the check." "How long is the check?" 4 minutes. "Then tell her in 4 minutes." The nurse did not smile, but something in her face shifted slightly in a direction that in different circumstances might have become one. It took 6 minutes, not 4, because Maya's blood pressure was lower than the nurse wanted, and she spent 2 extra minutes making notes and asking questions that Maya answered precisely and completely, because precision was how she communicated when she wanted something done quickly. Then the nurse left. Then Mitchell walked in. She was exactly as Maya had imagined her from the radio voice, not because the voice had given her specific physical details, but because it had given her the shape of the person. Compact, deliberate, the kind of posture that came not from military training alone, but from a lifetime of being someone who took up exactly the space she needed and not an inch more. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one on the table beside Maya's bed. "How are you feeling?" she said. "Better than I was at 3 a.m. Most people are." Mitchell sat down in the single chair beside the bed with the economy of movement of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had made peace with that fact. "I have a lot to tell you. Some of it is going to be difficult to hear." Maya picked up the coffee. Tell me. Mitchell looked at her for a moment, the specific calibrating look of a person deciding how much to front load and how much to build toward. Then she apparently decided that Maya was not a person who needed cushioning, which was the correct assessment. The names you gave me from the mountain, Mitchell said. We moved on both of them within 90 minutes of your transmission. By 4 a.m., we had one in custody. The second one, she paused. The second one was more complicated. The voice on the radio, Maya said, the one that contacted me on the aircraft. Mitchell's expression changed slightly. Not surprised, she had clearly been briefed on the aircraft communication, but something that registered the significance of Maya naming it first. Yes, she said, Major Leonard Carr. The name settled into the room. Maya had suspected it since 12:49 a.m. on the mountain, when the voice had begun discussing her unit's operational details with a familiarity that required current access. She had not known the name then, but she had known the level, she had known the clearance. She had known from the specific language the voice used that this was not an outsider with stolen intelligence. This was someone who had been inside the decision-making process for a long time. How long, she asked. We're still building the full picture. At minimum 3 years, possibly longer. Mitchell's voice was completely controlled, which Maya understood was the operational version of contained fury. He had access to unit deployment records, communication protocols, mission timelines. Everything the ambush team needed to set up exactly where and when they did. The ambush was planned specifically around our mission. Yes. They knew our route because he gave it to them. Yes. Maya held the coffee cup with both hands and felt the warmth of it move through her palms. She thought about the valley. She thought about the narrow point where the gunfire had started. She thought about the 22 minutes of extraction and the way the first shot had come from the eastern ridge with the patience of people who had been waiting a long time because they knew exactly when to wait. She thought about the fact that people had nearly died because of information that passed through someone's hands who was supposed to protect them. The ambush team knew I was wounded, she said. Yes. And they sent 2 people back to confirm I hadn't survived. Yes, a pause. Carr directed that search team personally. The room was quiet for a moment. He called me on the aircraft, Maya said. I know. He knew I had given you his name. We believe he knew within minutes. He had a secondary communication channel we hadn't identified yet. When we moved on, the first person, there was enough signal traffic that he understood the net was closing. Mitchell set down her own coffee cup. The contact he made with you on the aircraft, we've analyzed it. Our assessment is that it was not a threat. It was, she paused, choosing words, something else. He was trying to understand how I'd heard him, Maya said. Yes, and he was. Mitchell stopped again. Reynolds, this is the part that I need you to hear carefully because it's going to matter for what comes next. In that conversation on the aircraft, Carr said several things that were not consistent with the communication pattern of someone who believed they were going to escape accountability. He was not trying to negotiate. He was not trying to threaten you into silence. She looked at Maya directly. He surrendered to the interdiction team at 5:02 a.m. voluntarily before they reached his position. Maya processed this. He turned himself in. He walked out of the terrain on the north side of the mountain with his hands visible and his weapon on the ground 20 feet behind him. The team lead said, Mitchell paused, said he looked like a man who had made up his mind about something. Maya thought about the last thing Carr had said to her on the radio. Of course you can. She had heard something in those 3 words that she had filed away without examining too closely because she'd had other priorities at the time. Now she took the memory out and looked at it properly. He had not been surprised that she could hear him. He had been surprised that it had mattered. There was a difference there, a significant one. What's the first person you arrested saying, she asked. Captain James Whitfield. Mitchell's expression did not change, but something in her voice tightened almost imperceptibly. Whitfield is denying everything. He's lawyered up completely. We have enough from your testimony and the intercept record to proceed regardless. But his cooperation is not on the table. And Carr has been talking since 6 a.m. Maya looked up. Everything, Mitchell said. Names, dates, operations, money trails, communication channels. He is providing a complete account without negotiation or conditions. His attorney is present, but Carr is not waiting for the attorney to advise him before he speaks. Mitchell seemed to choose her next word with particular care. He appears to have decided that being truthful is what the situation requires. The door to the hospital room opened. Louise Tran walked in without knocking, which was completely consistent with every interaction Maya had ever had with her. She was still in field clothing that had dried imperfectly, and she had the particular look of someone who had been awake for more than 24 hours and had decided that sleep was a problem for tomorrow. She looked at Maya. Maya looked at her. "You came back first," Louise said. "You told me I could." Louise walked to the bed, sat on the edge of it without asking permission, and put her hand on Maya's arm in a grip that was firm enough to communicate everything that neither of them was going to say out loud in front of Major Mitchell. "Your watch is missing a link," Louise said, looking at the bracelet on Maya's wrist. "It went somewhere useful." Louise looked at her for a moment longer. Then she looked at Mitchell. "How bad is the internal situation?" "Significant," Mitchell said, "but contained. Reynolds gave us what we needed to move quickly." Louise looked back at Maya. "Of course she did," she said. At 3:47 p.m., Hayes came in. He knocked first, which Maya noted as a departure from his usual operational directness. She understood immediately what the knock meant. Not a request for permission, but an acknowledgement that this was her space and he was entering it differently than he would enter a briefing room or a field position. Louise stood up when he came in. "Captain," she said. Her voice was completely neutral, which was Louise's version of extremely loaded. "Tron." He looked at her for a moment, then back at Maya. "Can we have a few minutes?" Louise looked at Maya. Maya nodded. Louise left, which involved walking past Hayes with the very specific kind of deliberate non-expression that communicated volumes without saying anything. Hayes sat in the chair Mitchell had vacated. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at a point somewhere between his hands and the floor and was quiet for several seconds before he looked up. "I spoke with Mitchell," he said. "Full briefing. Everything you transmitted last night, everything the investigation has turned up so far." He stopped. "Everything Carr has been saying." "Okay," Maya said. "I need to say something to you and I need you to let me say it without stopping me." She waited. "I left you behind," he said. "That's a fact. Protocol supported the decision and I'd make the same call again in the same operational circumstances because the protocol exists for reasons that don't disappear because the outcome happened to be extraordinary." He held her gaze while he said the next part. "But I also want to tell you that from the moment I made that call, something in me knew it was going to be the defining decision of my career. Not because I thought you'd die. I told myself the extraction would come. I told myself the timeline was viable. But because I knew standing there that I was leaving someone behind who had warned me, who had been right, who had told me the valley was wrong and I had not had time to hear it." Maya said nothing. "That's going to stay with me," he said. "The protocol was right, and leaving you was still something I'm going to carry." "I know," she said. "I'm not looking for absolution." "I know that too." A pause. "I'm looking to understand," he said, "how you did it. Not the technical part. Mitchell briefed me on the acoustic mechanics. I mean," he paused, searching for the right framing, "how you held it together. Alone, wounded, for nearly 5 hours in those conditions." Maya thought about this question. She thought about the 6-hour number she had given herself. She thought about the watch band link and the connector and the click that had been almost too small to count. She thought about lying motionless while footsteps crossed the high ground 60 meters away. "I had a reason," she said. 312 of them. Hayes looked at her. "But also," she said quietly, "I've been doing this my whole life, not the wound part. The being alone in the noise part. Figuring out what's real and what matters from everything coming at you at once." She looked at her hands. "When you've done something your whole life, you get good at it. Even when the conditions are as bad as they get." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that she did not expect. "I'm going to recommend you for a citation, formally, through every channel available to me." "Sir, let me finish. I'm going to recommend the citation, and I'm going to write a personal statement to accompany it that puts on record what your acoustic intelligence specifically prevented and how you provided it." His voice had a quality she had not heard from him before, not the operational authority she was used to, but something more deliberate, more personal. "I've been writing unit assessments for 16 years. I've described a lot of people's work. I've never described anything like last night." "Captain," she said, And she stopped because what she wanted to say was complicated, and she was tired, and the wound in her side was a consistent reminder that she had already spent a lot of words on last night. Thank you. You warned me about the valley, he said. Yes, I should have listened. You had constraints I didn't have. That's generous. It's accurate. She looked at him. I need you to be able to function as a commanding officer going forward, sir. And I need you to understand that I don't hold last night against you in the way that would make that harder. What I need from you is different. Name it. I need you to listen, she said simply. When I flag something, when I say I'm hearing something that doesn't fit, I need a 30-second pause before the override. She held his gaze. That's all I've ever needed. Hayes was quiet. That's all, he said. That's everything, she corrected. He nodded once, the kind of nod that was not agreement as formality, but agreement as commitment, and she had been listening to people long enough to know the difference. He left. Louise reappeared in the doorway approximately 4 seconds after Hayes's footsteps moved far enough down the corridor. How'd that go, she said, the way it needed to. Louise came back in and sat on the bed again. Carr's testimony is going to open up a lot of things, she said. Mitchell told me, it's not just our unit, it goes wider. I know. There are going to be investigators, formal proceedings. You're going to have to tell the story a lot of times to a lot of people who are going to have the same expression on their face the first time they hear the distance range you were working at. I know that too. You ready for that? Maya considered the question seriously. She thought about every time she had been called lucky. Every time she had written something down because Louise told her to, and the documentation had eventually slowly built a record that was harder to dismiss than a single incident. She thought about the way Mitchell had said things are going to change, and whether she believed it, and the answer was partially. Not because Mitchell was wrong, but because change was not a single event. It was the accumulation of enough moments that something eventually tipped. Last night had been a significant moment, but the work of making it stick that was going to be the longer project. I've been ready, she said. I've just been waiting for the question to be asked by someone with the authority to act on the answer. Louise looked at her with the expression that Maya had come to understand over a year of working alongside her was the Louise Tran version of deep respect, quiet, direct, and completely unsentimental. Your grandmother called, Louise said. Maya looked up. The hospital listed her as emergency contact. Someone from admin called her this morning. Louise paused. She said to tell you that she knew you were awake before the nurse checked on you. Said you always woke up the same time you went to sleep the previous day when you were young, like an internal clock. Maya was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong, she said softly. She also said, Louise's voice changed slightly, became something quieter. She said, tell her I heard it too, whatever that means. Maya closed her eyes. She did not explain what it meant. She did not need to. Some things were meant to be understood by the people who already understood them and left alone by everyone else. At 6:00 p.m., a formal investigator arrived with a recording device and a stack of documentation that suggested the next several hours were going to be thorough, in the way that only official processes could achieve. Maya answered every question completely. She described the acoustic mechanics of what she had heard. She described the timeline which she had kept in her memory with the precision of someone who tracked time by sound as much as by clock. She described the voice, the language, the specific operational details that had been discussed in fragments she had assembled into a complete picture. She described it all twice. When the investigator asked her carefully, diplomatically, whether she would be willing to work with an acoustic researcher to document and study the nature of her hearing ability for potential application to military intelligence practice, she looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said, on one condition. Name it. The research treats this as a skill set to be understood and trained, not a medical anomaly to be studied. She kept her voice level. I am a scout. I am good at my job. The specific way I am good at my job is something that can be taught, at least partially, to people who are willing to learn. I want that to be the frame. The investigator wrote something down. I'll pass that along, he said. Please do. At 8:30 p.m., when the investigator had finally collected everything he needed and the hospital had returned to its quieter evening rhythms, Louise came back one more time. She was carrying Maya's radio, the broken, repaired, battered device that had been pulled from her hands on the aircraft. She set it on the table. Someone in maintenance asked if it was trash, Louise said. I told them it was a war trophy. Maya looked at the radio for a long moment. The cracked housing, the bent guide track, the absent watch band link that was somewhere inside the mechanism holding the connector in its seat. She picked it up. It felt lighter than she remembered, smaller. In the dark on the mountain, it had felt like the most significant object in the world. Now in the light of a hospital room, it was just a piece of damaged equipment, except it wasn't. Keep it, Louise said. I will. And Reynolds, Louise stopped at the door. She turned back with the particular quality of someone who has thought carefully about what they're about to say and has decided that this is the moment for it. What Carr said to you on the aircraft? Of course you can. She paused. What did you hear in that? Maya thought about it. She thought about the voice on the mountain, all those hours tracking a target. It never expected to be overheard. She thought about the moment it had understood what had happened, not just that it had been heard, but that the hearing had mattered, that a 19-year-old girl in the mud had taken everything it said and turned it into the thing that undid the plan. It had spent years building. Respect, she said finally, the wrong kind from the wrong person for the wrong reasons, but genuine. Louise considered this. That's a complicated answer. It's a complicated situation. Louise nodded once, then she left. Maya sat with the radio in her hands and listened to the hospital around her. The evening shift was well underway. Somewhere down the hall, two nurses were debating something in low voices that she could hear clearly, but chose not to process their conversation was their own. The generator was cycling through its load pattern with a slight irregularity on the upstroke that she estimated was a maintenance issue that would need attention within the next 3 to 4 weeks. She heard rain beginning again outside. Not the violent world-ending rain of the previous night, something lighter, the kind of rain that came at the end of a storm cycle rather than the beginning. She listened to it fall. She thought about 312 people who had gone to sleep in Fort Harrison and woken up to find out that someone had saved them, and who would probably never know her name, and who did not need to know her name for it to matter that she had been there. She thought about the investigation that was going to unfold over the next weeks and months, and the hearings and the documentation and the careful, slow, bureaucratic process of determining what had been lost over 3 years of internal compromise and what could be recovered. She thought about Hayes's promise to listen. She thought about whether it would hold. She thought about the fact that she would be watching because she was always watching, always listening, and she would know within 30 seconds of the next time it mattered whether the promise was real or whether it was the kind of thing people said in hospital rooms and forgot in the field. She thought it was real. She had heard it in his voice. And Maya Reynolds, the girl they had left behind, held her broken radio and listened to the rain and let the evening settle around her and understood quietly without drama, without ceremony, that something had ended tonight and something else had begun, and that the beginning was going to be harder and more important and more worth doing than anything that had come before. She put the radio down on the table beside her. She lay back. She closed her eyes, and she listened. 3 weeks after the night in the Bitterroot Mountains, Maya Reynolds sat in a formal hearing room in front of 7 people who collectively held more institutional authority than she had ever been in the same space with, and she answered every question they asked with the same precision she had used to track enemy movements across miles of mountain terrain on the worst night of her life. The process had been building toward this room since the morning after the extraction. Debriefs, documentation, independent verification, acoustic specialist consultations, each layer adding weight to a record that was becoming something the institution could no longer treat as exceptional in the dismissible sense of the word. The investigation into Major Leonard Carr and Captain James Whitfield was formally underway. The attack on Fort Harrison had been analyzed from every angle. The secondary element, the vehicles and materiel that the interdiction team had stopped on the eastern approach road, had been cataloged and documented. Every piece of that night had been examined, measured, and filed. Every piece traced back to one source. The girl sitting in the hearing room with her hands folded on the table and her eyes steady, and her voice giving the panel exactly what it asked for in the order it asked for it, without elaboration and without apology. The senior investigator was Colonel Warren, a man in his late 50s with the kind of face that had processed a great deal of unexpected information over a long career and had developed through repeated practice a method for doing so without showing his reactions in real time. He was good at his job. Maya had recognized this within the first 4 minutes of the session because the quality of his questions told her exactly how carefully he had read the pre-hearing documentation, and the documentation was extensive. He set a sheet of paper on the table in front of him and looked at her across it. "Corporal Reynolds," he said, "the acoustic range documented in your field transmissions has been reviewed by 3 independent specialists. All 3 characterized it as outside the established parameters of documented human hearing capability." "Yes, sir. You're aware of that characterization." "I've been aware of that characterization in various forms since I was approximately 8 years old," she said. "It's the standard response when someone encounters the data without a framework to put it in." Warren looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but in the small, specific way of someone who has just recalibrated their assessment of who they're talking to. "Walk me through the framework," he said, and Maya talked. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping, and nobody interrupted her, which was itself a departure from every previous experience she had of explaining her ability to people with institutional authority. She described the mechanics, the processing, the non-selective attention, the way sound layered, and how she had learned to separate the layers, the way other people separated colors. She described how valley geometry affected acoustic behavior in specific weather conditions. She described the specific chain of reasoning that had taken her from an overheard conversation to a complete operational picture of an assault force. She described it the way she always described things when she was allowed to finish clearly, precisely, with no wasted words and no performance. When she stopped, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Colonel Ingrid Schultz, who had been taking careful notes since the session began, looked up. "Reynolds," she said, "you determined insider access from conversational comfort level. Explain that more specifically." "The operational vocabulary," Maya said. "The phrases Carr used when discussing unit positioning and extraction protocol, they were internal shorthand. The kind of language that develops inside a closed group over time and doesn't exist in any external document. He used them without thinking, without defining them, because he was comfortable in them." She paused. "People performing familiarity they don't genuinely have always show effort. A slight delay, a slight overcorrection. He showed none. He spoke like someone who was home in that language because he had been living inside it for years." Schultz set down her pen. She looked at Warren. The look that passed between them lasted approximately 2 seconds and contained, Maya estimated, a significant amount of unspoken agreement. Warren called a recess. The recess lasted 41 minutes. Maya sat in the corridor with cold coffee and waited with the patience of someone who understood that 41 minutes was not a long time compared to the night she had spent in the Bitterroot Mountains. And she listened to the building around her, the HVAC system, the footsteps on different floor materials, the conversation 3 rooms away that she chose not to process, and she thought about what was happening on the other side of the door and whether it mattered to her in the way she had once thought it would. She had imagined when she was younger and the dismissals were fresher that official recognition would feel like a specific thing, something large, something that arrived with a particular sound or quality that she would identify immediately and know. Sitting in this corridor, she understood that recognition was not a single moment. It was a process of accumulation, like sound layering in a valley, like documentation building into a record, one piece at a time until the weight of it became undeniable. When Warren came back, he was alone, and he sat across from her in the corridor with the informal quality of someone who had decided to say something off the record. "I have a daughter," he said, 22, second year of officer candidate training. Her evaluation team has flagged her pattern recognition in communication intercepts as exceptional and has consistently failed to translate that into appropriate operational deployment. Because where do you pause? Because they don't have a framework for what she's doing. Maya said nothing. "I want to send her to talk to you," he said. "Not officially, not as part of any program, just to talk." "Send her," Maya said. He nodded. "Thank you, Reynolds." He went back into the room. A formal recommendation came 14 days later. It established 2 things that had not existed before: a citation for Maya Reynolds, documenting the intelligence she had provided and the specific circumstances under which she had provided it, every detail verified. Every detail resistant to the polite dismissal that had characterized the institutional response to her ability for the entirety of her service, and the establishment of a research and training program within the Montana Reconnaissance Division, specifically focused on acoustic intelligence as a trainable operational skill. The program was to be developed in consultation with the scout who had demonstrated its value on the night of the Bitterroot Mountains mission. Louise Tran was standing outside the administration office when Maya came out with the notification. Louise read it, handed it back. "How does it feel?" she said. "Like a beginning," Maya said, "not an ending. Because there's still work. There's always still work." Louise looked at her with the specific quiet of someone who had something else to say and was deciding whether this was the right moment. "Carr's full testimony was released to the investigation panel this morning," she said. Maya had been waiting for this. "He testified," Louise continued, "that after you identified him, after you transmitted his name, he made a decision. Not just to surrender, to tell everything, completely, without conditions." She paused. "He testified that he had spent 3 years believing the unit's intelligence capability had specific limits, that he had studied those limits carefully, that he understood them well enough to operate inside them undetected." She paused again. "And then he said that you were outside every limit he had calculated for, and that when he understood what you had done from that position, with that equipment in those conditions, he realized that the only thing he had left that carried any integrity was the truth." The corridor was quiet. "He's not using it as mitigation," Louise said quickly. "He knows what he did." His attorney made sure that was clear. "He's just explaining the sequence." Maya thought about the voice on the mountain. The long, careful hours of tracking it through the acoustic channel. The moment it had gone quiet at 2:30 a.m., and she had understood immediately that quiet was not absence, it was recalculation. The transmission on the aircraft, "soldier to soldier," the 3 words at the end, "of course you can." She had heard something in those 3 words at the time that she had stored without examining fully because she'd had other priorities. Now she took it out and looked at it directly. He had not been surprised that she could hear him. He had been surprised that it had mattered enough for someone to act on. "It matters," she said finally. "Not in the way that makes what he did acceptable. But yes, the truth being given completely, not just extracted piece by piece, makes the record more durable." She looked at Louise. "The truth is more useful when the person who is hiding it stops hiding it." Louise considered this for a moment. "Whitfield," she said, "still denying everything. His attorney filed a motion yesterday to suppress your testimony as the primary intelligence basis for the charges on the grounds that the acoustic intercept ranges." Louise's expression did something complicated, scientifically untenable. Maya looked at her. "He's arguing I couldn't have heard what I heard," she said. "Yes, from a lawyer who has presumably read the independent specialist reports. All 3 of them, yes." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. Louise blinked. "Good? Because that motion is going to force the panel to put the acoustic documentation on the formal evidentiary record in order to respond to it, which means everything I transmitted, every detail, every timeline, every name gets entered as verified evidence rather than as supporting testimony." She held Louise's gaze. "He just made the record permanent, trying to erase it." Louise stared at her. "You thought about this," she said. "I thought about a lot of things in 41 minutes of corridor." Louise made a sound that was half laugh and half something more complicated. "Reynolds," she said, "I've been in this unit for 11 years. I have worked alongside some of the sharpest operational minds I have ever met." She paused. "You are something else entirely." At 9:00 a.m. the following Tuesday, Warren's daughter arrived. Her name was Claire, and she had her father's eyes in the particular quality of someone who had been told their whole life that they were good at something without ever being told exactly what to do with it. She was 22 in the 2nd year of officer candidate training, and she sat across from Maya in the small conference room that Louise had arranged with the slightly braced posture of someone prepared to be skeptical of their own expectations. "My father said you'd understand something specific," she said without preamble, which Maya immediately liked. "He didn't tell me what." "Tell me about the pattern recognition," Maya said. Claire looked at her for a moment. Then she talked. She talked about the communication intercepts she had been processing in her training rotations, the way she could hear structure in what looked like noise, the way she could identify not just what was being said, but the relationship between the speakers, the comfort or discomfort in the phrasing, the presence of rehearsed language versus natural language. She talked about how she had tried multiple times to document these assessments in her evaluation reports and how they had been received with the particular brand of polite professional skepticism that Maya recognized with a specificity that felt almost physical. She talked for 8 minutes. Then she stopped. Nobody uses it, she said. They note it, they don't use it. Because they don't have a framework, Maya said. My father said the same thing. Your father is right. Maya leaned forward slightly. Here's what I want you to understand. The framework is not something that gets handed to you from the institution. The institution is going to build one. Eventually, there are people working on it right now, but that process takes time. What you do in the meantime is document. She held Claire's gaze. Every time you hear something in an intercept that your evaluation team doesn't flag you, write it down. Date time what you heard, what you assessed it to mean, and what the subsequent verification showed. Every time, without exception. She paused. You build the record becomes undeniable. And when the framework arrives, you already have the evidence to step into it. Claire was quiet. That's what you did, she said. That's what a sergeant named Louise Tran told me to do when I was 18 and nobody was listening, Maya said. And the record is why I'm sitting in this room now, instead of still being called lucky. Something shifted in Claire's expression. Not the obvious shift of someone who has just been impressed. Something quieter and more significant, the shift of someone who has just been handed a tool they have needed for a long time and had no name for. Okay, she said. Start today, Maya said. Don't wait for the next evaluation cycle. Today. Okay, Claire said again, and this time there was a different quality to it, decision rather than acknowledgement. They talked for 2 more hours. When Claire left, Maya sat in the conference room for a few minutes in the specific quiet that follows a conversation that has accomplished something real. She thought about the program outline that Hayes had approved the previous week. She thought about the 12 scouts who had been selected for the first acoustic training cohort. She thought about the way the institutional acknowledgement, slow and imperfect as it was beginning to build something that would outlast any single operation or citation. She thought about the night in the mountains and the way the valley geometry had turned distant voices into clear ones, and how nothing about that had been accidental or magical. It had been physics in attention in the specific kind of discipline that came from spending a lifetime taking seriously the things other people dismissed. She thought about Louise's voice the morning after the extraction, told you I'd come back for you. You came back first. Typical. She thought about Hayes' signature on the day pass he would give her in 3 weeks when she drove back to the mountain alone to stand in the place where everything had changed and make sure it was real. She stood up. She went back to work. The formal hearing on Whitfield's suppression motion took place on a Thursday morning in early November. Maya was not required to testify. Her documentation had already been entered into the evidentiary record in full, exactly as she had predicted it would be when she had called the motion good in the corridor outside the administration office. She attended anyway. She sat in the back of the room and listened. The motion was denied in 19 minutes. The presiding officer's language, when she read the denial into the record, was precise and unambiguous in the way that legal language sometimes achieved when the facts it was describing left no room for anything else. The acoustic intercept testimony of Corporal Maya Reynolds was verified, documented, and supported by independent expert analysis. The range parameters were outside established norms. They were nonetheless demonstrated to be accurate. The motion to suppress was denied. Whitfield's attorney looked at his client. Whitfield looked at the table. Maya looked at neither of them. She was listening to something outside the building. A vehicle on the road 2 blocks north, engine pattern, indicating a military transport, probably returning from a field rotation based on the load-weight sound of the tires. She was listening to the HVAC system beginning its afternoon cycle. She was listening to the breathing patterns of the people around her, which told her a great deal about how the 19-minute proceeding had landed for each of them. She was listening to the moment the way she always listened to moments, with the full and undivided attention of someone who understood that the world was always speaking, and the only question was whether you were paying attention. And she stood up. She walked out of the hearing room into the corridor. Louise was waiting. Well, Louise said. Denied, Maya said. Louise nodded once. Good. She fell into step beside Maya. Hayes wants a briefing this afternoon on the training module. The first cohort starts Monday. I know, I have the outline. Louise paused with the quality of someone choosing words. He asked me to tell you something that he apparently couldn't figure out how to say directly. Maya looked at her. He said the valley route. He thinks about it every day. Louise kept walking. He said he wanted you to know that. Maya walked 2 steps in silence. Tell him I know, she said, and tell him Monday's cohort is the answer to it. Louise looked at her sidelong. That's either the most gracious thing I've ever heard or the most efficient. Both, Maya said for the second time in 3 weeks. The first acoustic training cohort met on a Monday morning in the second week of November in a training room that had been partially reconfigured based on Maya's specifications. 12 scouts, 10 men, 2 women, ages ranging from 20 to 31. All of them experienced, all of them selected because their evaluation records showed some version of the quality she was looking for. Not necessarily acoustic specifically, but a demonstrated pattern of noticing things others missed. She stood at the front of the room. She looked at 12 faces looking back at her with the carefully maintained neutrality of experienced field personnel meeting. Someone new in a teaching capacity, which she understood was professionalism rather than skepticism, or rather it was professional skepticism, which was the correct kind. She said, I'm not here to teach you to hear the way I hear. You won't get there in this program, maybe ever. She paused. What I'm here to teach you is to stop filtering the way you currently filter, because every one of you is receiving more acoustic information than you're processing, and every piece you're discarding is intelligence that could be operational. One of the scouts, a man named Reeves, 31, with the particular watchfulness of someone who had been in the field long enough to know what he didn't know, raised his hand. Difference between training and ability, he said. How much of what you do can actually be transferred? More than you think, she said. Less than I do. She looked at him directly. The question isn't whether you can reach my level. The question is whether you're better at the end of this than you were at the beginning. And the answer to that is yes, definitively yes. Reeves nodded. He wrote something down. She taught for 3 hours without stopping. She taught the way she had learned everything that mattered to her through specific examples. Precise mechanics and the patient repetition of principles that sounded simple and were only simple in the way that any deeply practiced skill looks simple from the outside. At the end of the 3rd hour, she sent them into the field for a listening exercise. No technology, no earpieces, just the terrain and the instructions she had given them and the experience of paying attention to the full acoustic picture of the environment around them. For 1 uninterrupted hour, she watched them go. Louise appeared at her shoulder. How do you think they'll do? She said. Better than they expect, Maya said. The first time you actually pay attention, it's always surprising. Most people have never done it even once. She paused. After this afternoon, every single one of them will have done it once. And once is where it starts. The scouts came back at the end of the hour. Their faces were different. Not dramatically, not in the way of movie revelations, where someone has a life-altering experience, and it shows immediately on their face, but in the small, specific way of people who have encountered something they did not know existed and are still processing what to do with that information. Reeves came back with 3 pages of handwritten notes. He looked at Maya. I heard a vehicle on the access road to the east, he said. Military transport, before any visual confirmation, about 90 seconds before. 90 seconds is significant, she said. I know. He looked at his notes. I didn't trust it at first. I almost dismissed it. But you didn't. I wrote it down. Maya looked at him for a moment. Good, she said. That's the whole thing right there. That's the entire practice. You heard something. You almost dismissed it. You didn't. You wrote it down. She held his gaze. Do that every time, for 6 months. And then tell me what your operational picture looks like. Reeves looked at his 3 pages. He nodded. In the 3rd week of November, Maya drove to the Bitterroot Mountains. She had told Hayes she was taking a day pass without specifying destination, and he had asked 2 questions, both operational, both addressed by her answers, and signed it. That was the listening he had promised. That was what it looked like in practice, not grand gestures, just a signature given because the person asking for it had earned the basic presumption of good judgment. She parked on the north side of the valley and walked to the rock formation. She found the specific location. The eastern end where the shelter had been best, where the boulder configuration had put her back against solid stone, and the natural acoustic channel had run east. Southeast above her, like a corridor built by the mountain itself, she stood there. She did not perform anything for herself. She did not narrate what she was feeling or build it into the kind of private ceremony that places sometimes seem to demand. She just stood in the location where she had lain in the mud and bled and listened for nearly 5 hours and held the line until someone on the other end was paying enough attention to act on what she was telling them. She listened. The mountain in November was different from the mountain in October. Quieter in ways that had nothing to do with less happening and everything to do with different things happening. The acoustic signature of the terrain had shifted with the season, different vegetation, different temperature differential, different wind patterns off the ridgeline. But the fundamental shape of it was the same. The channel was still there. The ridge formation to the east-southeast was the same ridge formation. The mountain was the mountain. She stood in the place where she had almost died and listened to it being itself, and she thought about 312 people who had gone to sleep and woken up without knowing that the distance between those two things had been managed by a 19-year-old girl lying in the mud with a watch band link and a decision. She thought about Reeves writing down what he heard. She thought about Claire documenting every intercept that the evaluation team missed. She thought about 12 scouts walking back from an hour of full attention with different faces than they had left with. She thought about Louise's voice told you I'd come back. You came back first. She thought about her grandmother. She called her. Her grandmother picked up on the second ring, never the first, always the second, and said her name the way she always said it, not as a greeting, but as recognition. Maya. Hi, Grandma. You went back to the mountain. Maya stopped. How did you know, she said. A brief silence. Because it's what you do. You go back to the things that changed you, to make sure they're real. Her grandmother's voice was quiet and certain in equal measure. Is it real? Maya looked at the valley, at the rock formation, at the acoustic channel running east-southeast above her that had carried the voices of people who believed they were speaking into empty air. It's real, she said. Tell me. And Maya talked, not the operational version, not the timeline, and the acoustic mechanics and the verified documentation. The other version, the one she had not told anyone yet that existed underneath all the official language. She told her grandmother about lying in the mud with the rain coming down and the blood going out, and the moment she had heard the voices and understood what they were saying and made the decision, not the radio decision, not the tactical decision, but the one that came before both of those. The decision that she was not finished, that she had something left to do and she was going to do it. She talked for a long time. Her grandmother listened. And when she finished, her grandmother said, I knew that about you when you were 4 years old. What did you know? That you weren't the kind of person who stopped. A pause. Most people, when things get hard enough, find a place to stop. They don't always choose it, but there's a place where the cost gets too high and the mind finds a reason to stop. Another pause. You don't have that place. Everybody has a limit, Maya said. Yes, her grandmother agreed. But not everybody finds theirs in the same places. Yours is somewhere further out than most people's. Her voice softened. That's not always comfortable. No, Maya said, it's not. Is it worth it? Maya thought about Reeves's 3 pages of notes. She thought about Claire's eyes when she had said okay and meant it. She thought about 12 scouts who had gone into the field with one kind of attention and come back with another. She thought about the record building itself piece by piece into something permanent and operational and useful. Yes, she said, it's worth it. Come home for Christmas, her grandmother said. 2 weeks, I'll sleep for 4 days. Don't sleep too long, the birds come back in the morning and I know you don't like to miss them. Maya stood in the cold November air and felt the mountain around her and listened to the wind in the ridge above, to the water moving underground, to the distant sound of a road, somewhere to the northwest where traffic was building toward the end of the workday, and she smiled in the way that people smile when something is exactly right. I won't miss them, she said. She said goodbye. She walked back to the truck. She drove back with the window down and the cold air moving through the cab and the sounds of the mountain receding and the sounds of the road opening up and the whole acoustic world coming in the way it always had, every frequency, every layer, every piece of information that most people filtered out before it reached the part of their brain that could use it, and she let all of it in. the way she had always let it in, the way she would always let it in. Because the girl they had driven away from in the rain had come back with something that no citation and no training program and no formal recommendation could fully contain, the absolute demonstrated documented permanent proof that the thing everyone had called instinct was discipline, that the thing everyone had called luck was attention, and that the person everyone had left behind had been from the very beginning the one who could hear what was coming before anyone else knew to listen. They abandoned her in the storm because they believed she was their weakness. She was never their weakness. She was their earliest warning, their clearest signal, their most precise intelligence. And she had been all of those things quietly and completely every single day before the night. The mountain finally gave it her the conditions to prove it. The storm had not made her. It had only made her impossible to ignore. And that was permanent now. That was in the record. That was